You are listening to the Hemp Startup Journey. My name is Jason De Los Santos, co-founder of Spectrum Labs, a hemp extraction facility in Asheville, North Carolina. I'm sitting down with hemp entrepreneurs, scientists, and politicians willing to share their perspectives, lessons learned, and how we can make an impact on the hemp and cannabis industry for everyone. Stephanie, thank you so much for joining me on the Hemp Startup Journey. How are you today?
I'm wonderful. It's a sunny day. We're getting a little bit of summer in the fall up here in Toronto, so we will take it.
Yeah, awesome. And I just noticed something real quickly. So on your bookshelf, you have a bunch of books, and I'd love to know what they are. But I noticed that you have them like organized by color. Is that yeah?
It's a thing. I don't know. I feel like I saw it online somewhere. I'm not a big decorator. If you saw the rest of my apartment, there's literally nothing on the walls. There's one photo. But I saw that and I thought it was kind of cool because, kind of creates a story. And then I have a cell phone, my dad's cell phone from 1980. So it's the block cell, Zach Morris.
It's an antique.
Yeah, and then a couple of Dr. Seuss books that keep me young. So
that's awesome.
It tells a story, but it does become a conversation piece. So I appreciate it.
You're the second person that I've noticed with that, and I'm just, like my OCD brain is like, wait, no, like it has to be alphabetically, right? Like by the duodecimal system.
That's a different way to approach it, but yeah, the colors work for now. But the problem is too, it's full. Like the two shelves are full. I have no more space, so I have to get enough books to fill enough more colors. So I have to like color code and like, do I pick a color that's lacking? Do I just go across the rainbow? Like, what am I doing here? So
they're like, I can't buy that book. It doesn't fit my whole color scheme. What is this?
What category do you fit in?
Awesome. All right. So, let's get into it. I've been thinking about our conversation here. And so before we get started, just to give context to people, can you give us a brief about what you do?
Yeah. So I am a global recruiter for the cannabis and hemp industry. So I live up here in Canada where next week we actually are celebrating 4 years of federal legalization, both medically and recreationally for Canada. So we've been really privileged to be able to be one of the first, Western countries to be able to legalize cannabis and kind of moving through that framework. So I've been a recruiter up here. I've placed over 100 people from seed to sale. So all types of roles from junior to senior and then across the entire supply chain. So I've got to learn a lot, mostly from osmosis and just spending my days hearing career stories of the individuals that I'm talking to in the industry. I've also had the privilege to work in Europe. And now I'm actually doing more and more cannabis career coaching. So helping people understand what it looks and feels like to work in cannabis, how to position themselves to get into cannabis, how to move their careers within the industry and within the ecosystem. And then actually right now, there's a lot of people who are also exploring going back out of the industry. So helping them position themselves so that they can go back in traditional industries. And my kind of caveat is I'll act as the bridge to bring them back in when they call me in about a year when they're happy to come back. So I'm really lucky to do what I do. And the cannabis industry is a really fascinating place and never a dull moment, we say.
So you're in a really interesting position because you're sort of a liaison between both company and then from the employee or the person that's looking to get into a company. So you must like have a really good understanding of just the market as a whole, right? At a high level, like what are the trends that you're seeing? Could be from the perspective of the job seeker or from the perspective of the company. What are you seeing now?
We're in a really interesting space here in Canada. I actually had a conversation earlier today with someone from the US explaining sort of the market and had a lot of very deep dialogue in the last few weeks with my colleagues as the industry sort of transitions and we look forward into year 5. So, yes, my clients typically would be either the companies or the individuals. So from a company perspective, we're seeing companies get a lot, especially in Canada, we're seeing them get a little leaner. So in early days, when they had to build, so we're looking back like 5-6 years, you had to bring a lot of minds around the table. You had to create some things from nothing. So you had to bring in the builders, the creators, the visionaries to come in and really create the machine, I call it, create the infrastructure, build these 1,000,000 square foot facilities, get them up and operational. But all of the data, all of the hype was really based around hypothetical and projections and not actually what happened. And then on top of that, we had a 2 years plus of a global pandemic. So our industry, those 4 years, it's been really, really an interesting time for all of us at a global scale and within the industry. So within companies themselves, the trends I'm seeing right now is actually teams are getting a little bit leaner. They're getting a little bit smaller and more focused. So yes, there are some companies up here that are sort of what we would call vertically integrated, as much as our government will allow within our framework. But we are seeing a niching down. So companies that might have had a very wide product portfolio are really getting focused on, okay, what brands are bringing in the money? What are actually customers wanting? Where are we getting traction in the market, and where can we actually close an area and let someone else be the expert in that area? So an example is, we're seeing cultivation companies just do strictly cultivation, and they'll sell their biomass on bulk to the processors or to other companies who are looking for that biomass, but they're not trying to process, they're not trying to do all the packaging. They're just strictly growing and becoming experts in growing. And then we have companies that are strictly the experts in processing and extraction, very high tech, advanced technology that's coming out now with new types of extraction in the product categories we would call 3.0. So hydrocarbon extraction, solventless, all of these sort of new methodologies, they're starting to niche down. And then even with products and brands, companies are starting to say, okay, well, we might only have 5 to 10 SKUs on the market ever. What is that going to look like? Do we need to have a whole facility? Can we work with someone else? Can they kind of co-pack for us? Can we have shared cultivation facilities? There's some really interesting trends in terms of how people are getting creative about being profitable in the market. On the employee side, I still see a lot of curiosity. The US market, there's so many people who want to get into cannabis, and it becomes this sort of like, ooh, there's so much hype around it. It's so cool. You guys just sit around and smoke weed all day. And I think there's a lot of different conceptions and misconceptions about the industry. So on the US side, there's a lot of people curious to get in. How do they market themselves? What markets to go into? This state is different than this state. Do I move? Do I relocate? So there's a lot of consideration. In the Canadian market, I'm seeing sort of a double split as well. So if people who are in the industry who are curious about taking a next step, who are maybe worried a little bit about their employment, so they're starting to look elsewhere. Or you have people that are saying they still want to come in, and is there still space for me? Can I still bring innovation into the cannabis space after 4 years? Because they have heard different stories and seen sort of the product usage, and they're starting to become consumers and users themselves. And then again, in Canada, I see a bit of a trend of people getting tired or burned out. They want to go elsewhere and take a break. And so they are going back into traditional industries or exploring that time. To take a little bit of a break, to refresh. And I, as a recruiter, that does break my heart because I'm so passionate about the cannabis industry, and so many of them are the innovators and the builders. But at the same time, a burned out individual is not going to be helpful to the industry, right? Someone who's not coming at full capacity, full excitement, full energy. Go back, take a break. I say, get a stable paycheck, go fishing, go on vacation, work 9 to 5. Work a system, and you'll probably be bored in 6 to 12 months and want to come back anyways, but you'll be a better version of yourself. So we seem to see a lot of iterations of where people and companies are across the industry.
You said something earlier that was really interesting, and I never really thought about this, but somebody transitioning from the cannabis industry into, say, like a more traditional industry. And I remember when we were looking for our chemist a few years ago, and we had a lot of folks that were really hesitant. They sort of would come in and almost like afraid that somebody would see them like coming into our business. And that was one of their concerns. Like, well, I don't know if I want to get into this industry, because if I want to go back to a more traditional sort of like science role, that they might shun me or just look at me in this really weird way because I worked in our case here in the States in hemp. Is that a big problem for you, or a big concern from some of the folks that you coach?
I have heard about the belief that there's stigma in the market when people try to go back out. No, I can't speak for everyone's experience, and I've heard stories and I believe them. But yeah, there is certain areas and certain places where people say they feel a little more stigma than others. I do know, until we have federal legalization and acceptance in the US, there still will be pockets of stigma around, were you doing something illegal? Was this sort of bad? And in some of the emerging markets where there was this war on drugs for years as well, there's always this sort of like trepidation about getting involved in it. But I do think there's ways to circumvent that. And that's kind of why I do the career coaching and why I sit with them. And so positioning themselves through their resumes, you worked in a startup industry that you built out of nothing. Like that is the skill set you gain out of that, the innovation, the mindset, the ability to kind of pivot, the ability to look at how to build systems, being so hands-on with figuring things out. That's such a unique skill set to now bring back to traditional industry where most people might have been handed a process. If you look at pharma, a lot of people are handed processes. They don't have time to ever say, okay, here's how we innovate. Here's how we make it a little bit better. Here's how we modify it for individuals who might not speak the same language. Here's how, we can get this person skilled up to learn this new one. Here's how we learned a new machine without even having, somebody there to train us and training we built. So there's like this opportunity to really shine and showcase that experience. And then obviously, once you get through the door and have conversations, there's ability to kind of position how you are as a human and taking that more traditional industry and then moving it back. I also think people need to be mindful about how they portray themselves. There are people in the industry, depending on where you are, that have chosen to use their social media platforms, use their voice. They're out there, they're posting things. And so depending on where you're trying to go from and then to, what's out there, making sure that you're positioning themselves using something like LinkedIn and making sure your profile is really professional is kind of circumvent some of the issues that could come up, and ultimately just show up as the professional that you are and be really confident in what you've achieved.
Yeah. Great. So switching gears, if we can talk about some of the more pressing issues that you hear about. The other day, we briefly talked about this in the popular culture right now. There's a lot of talk about quiet quitting, right? And then like right now, I just learned about this, I think a day or two ago, about quiet firing, which I didn't even know that was a thing. So are those things that you see within cannabis, or what are the biggest sort of issues that you're hearing right now?
Yeah, I mean, this is, again, I've been talking to the Canadian market, but I mean, I'm sure it reflects down in the US as well. But, we are seeing this weird dance right now between employees and employers. And I think all of us coming out of COVID and all of us coming out of the last 2 years of what shifted in the world, and a lot of us have shifted inside, right? So, and I don't think we can go through something that drastic and then that large scale and not kind of change. So now we have this sort of like internal kind of shifting around what that's going to look like between an employee and employer. And I don't think it's just a cannabis issue, but we do see specific things in the cannabis issue, in the cannabis industry. We're very lucky up here and down south as well. Cannabis was deemed an essential service. So during COVID, these companies were able to stay open and able to keep their facilities running. But again, they had to kind of exist in a different framework. So an example is if you had a plant touching, we call them licensed producers. If you had a licensed producer cultivation facility, when COVID hit, just the individuals that needed to be on site, quality management, hands-on quality management, operations, cultivation, those people had to be there, but anyone else was kept at home. And before that, the idea was everyone was on site. You had the marketing people sitting on site so they could see how the plants were growing and they were interacting with other individuals on the ground. And so looking at that shift, I still see a little bit of that battle between sort of the plant touching side of companies to the non-plant touching side. And that ability of like come back into office and into facility and like that's not going to be me. So that's an issue that I see in cannabis. Even now, I have a lot of US people reaching out to me and they're like, I live in a state where it's not legal, or I just want to work remotely. So they don't lead with I want this kind of job in cannabis. They lead with I want a remote job and I want to work in cannabis. And I often say back to them, like, I don't know if you can get the full kind of cannabis community integration or understanding if you're sitting at home and never interacting with your team or the facilities that are growing and processing this cannabis. So I think that's something really interesting. And then in terms of quiet quitting, we do see that as well. And as I mentioned, in Canadian industry, we have a lot of burnout. We have a lot of people who have worked around the clock. Plants don't sleep, and neither have people for the last 4 years. And so we have a lot of companies now also and people that have been put through negative experiences, layoffs, companies running out of money, toxic environments, companies changing direction every couple months to kind of keep up with what's happening on a global scale. So they're kind of just getting over it. And I think a lot of people are starting to do more quiet quitting because they're not feeling that they're appreciated by the company they work with. They're starting to see some of the red flags they might have seen before. And just kind of not aligning with where companies are going. There's also can be a lot of toxicity sometimes. And that company culture component, that piece of really like, how do we keep our employees engaged? That's something that wasn't considered a lot in the beginning because no one really had time for that. So we're at this stage now where it's like, okay, now we got to look at our people and we got to understand how to take care of them and create infrastructure or put HR teams in place or really just like understand what we can do to differentiate ourselves from the employees around us.
Yeah. And so can I interrupt you for a second, yeah. Stephanie? So on that point, just something practical. What, first of all, for somebody that's a manager or say that business owner, like how do they recognize somebody who is like quietly quitting and like, what do you do about that? Like, right? Because I think we hear the terms now, and at first it sounded kind of funny, but like, I mean, it's a serious thing, right? Like it's a relationship that exists between these two people, and somebody in an organization, in which like is probably a reason why you will have a job forever, right? Like this whole relationship thing between these two entities. But so regarding this whole quiet quitting thing, like how do you recognize it, and what do you do? Like, how do I, like, if I'm a manager, if I notice this, like, how do I engage? Like, what should I do from there?
Yes, I think that's a really good question. And so one of the things, one of the mottos that I use is people first, right? People first. So at the end of the day, we're all humans and we're all individual people. So yes, we come to work and we spend a lot of time there, but we also have so much happening in the background with our family, our community, ourselves. So there's always, we're the tip of the iceberg, and there's always so much underneath. And so as a manager, as an employer, each of your employees are going to be unique. And, you learn that management training about each one's different communication style, different conflict styles, different ways to interact with individuals. And so I think it starts with that. It starts to be like, who is this person and how were they acting before, right? Were they showing up early every day for the first 6 months and now they're coming in late every day? Okay, well, maybe now they have to drive their kids to school and their kids weren't in school before because of COVID. And so I might, instead of me going to them and being like, why are you late all the time? I can kind of start to converse with them and understand, oh, now they're stuck in traffic dropping their kids off every day. How can I support them from a management perspective, but still really make it clear that they're expected to pull their weight and like be on time for work? How can we work together there? So there's little examples of how you can kind of take that individual and kind of take some time. I think having that two-way dialogue that's not threatening, that's not, you're not in trouble, but what's going on here? I'm noticing something. You're not as engaged in the team meetings. What's going on? I used to love how you used to always have a question on our Monday morning team meetings. And now, you come on late and you leave early and you don't say anything. Is there something going on? How can I help you? Are you feeling comfortable? Do you have what you need? So really turning it around and making sure that the employee has a chance to actually like share and vent. If it ends up being something personal or something the team or the company can work around, that's great. But then, if it's something that comes through and it is sort of just that person's just really tuned out or not engaged anymore, asking them, what will make it better? How can I help you? And listening to their responses and making sure it's reasonable. And there's something like, I want to be a manager and I'm bored of listening to people. Well, that's something that's going to probably have to happen in the company. And then you can make decisions accordingly about how you'd work together to kind of circumvent that. But maybe they're just like, no, I'm kind of a little bit bored. And you have another, you can offer them another project or offer them another sort of opportunity. So I just think it's that two-way dialogue that's really going to be the answer. And then obviously if somebody is not coming to the table, not willing to have the conversations, then you can look into like, remedial action in terms of how you could let them know that it's pretty serious, and then sort of look at how you can work together to get them a little more engaged and involved in the process.
Hey all, Jason here with a quick commercial break. I want to tell you about Oliver's Harvest CBD. If you're in the market for a vendor or manufacturer that you can trust, then look no further. Oliver's Harvest has been in the business for a number of years. They are GMP certified, and get this, they actually answer the phone. Crazy. If they don't, they call you back within one business day. Beyond that, if you're looking for, let's say, private label opportunities, so you want to carry your label or your brand on a hemp product, if you are looking for wholesale opportunities where you're selling the Oliver's Harvest brand in your store, online, or brick and mortar, if you are looking for drop shipping so that you don't want to touch the physical product and you just want to sell it on a website somewhere, or even if you have some crazy idea and you want somebody to figure out how to put it together for you, then Oliver's Harvest does custom formulations as well. So the minimums are usually very low, depending on the product that you're interested in. And for products that are in stock, they ship within one business day after your account is set up. So very easy to work with. They have a wide selection of different products for you. And all you have to do to find out more is you can go to their website at oliversharvest.com/wholesale to find out more information. And now back to our show.
Interesting. Recently, I read some sort of a statistic along the lines of employees when they were surveyed, about maybe 10% of them felt like like they were not engaged or not doing the amount of work that was expected of them. But then when the same survey was asked by the managers about their employees, it was something like 57% didn't think that employees were doing the work that was expected. So like there's this disconnect, right? And I think what you just talking about can help to bridge that, and just having a conversation, and instead of just like, why are you doing X, like in the attack mode, it's more about engaging and asking. And it could be as simple as just like, how are you doing, right? Like it just depends on the relationship already established, or even just asking. I had a conversation with somebody on my team the other day where I asked like, hey, normally you respond by like within this time frame, or this quickly. I've noticed that you haven't done that as quickly lately, and so we got into a conversation about something that was going on in their life, and like we understood each other, and then he, without me asking, he right away said, oh well, like I'll do better, or I'll respond more quickly, or something like that, right? But it's just humanizing the interaction instead of thinking that it's some bot on the other side of you, right?
Yeah. And I think also too, like putting metrics around it, right? Like, you just said it right now, you're not responding as quickly as you used to. Well, what was that? Was that 5 minutes, 10 minutes, within the hour, within the day, right? And then that person comes back and they're like, this is happening in my life. And then the two of you go, okay, well, to feel, I would appreciate if you could respond within a 3-hour window. Is that possible for you? Because that to me would be still engaged if your emails are responded within 3 hours, right? Or day of. And then the person can, you can kind of work through that. So it's a marker. So then if that person, and both of you kind of come to an agreement around what that number or what that tangible, quantifiable agreement is. So then when that person is doing it, then you can say, hey, I'm noticing you're answering, this whole week you've been answering your emails in 3 hours. Amazing. Or if after a few weeks you'd be like, hey, we said 3 hours. The last, 2 weeks, there's been a couple of days where I haven't heard back from you for 2 days straight. Like, that 3 hours probably doesn't work. Like, can we continue to talk about that? Or how do we continue to work with that? Because that's the agreement that we had. Mm-hmm. So you kind of come to it as that table of like, we negotiated and now you have to have your bargain and here's how we're both going to measure it.
Yeah. And so on the employee side, if let's say somebody, like I'm working at a company and I recognize that I'm in this sort of like apathetic mode, or just like quietly quitting and just like not really engaged, like how do you coach people going through that? What do you suggest to them?
Yeah. So there's a few kind of key points I like to bring back to people. One of them is, again, to go back inside, right? Like, what is happening that you're bored? What is the sort of deeper root, deeper story around it? Is there something happening in your life? Are you distracted because of this? Did something happen that made you uncomfortable and now work is becoming, maybe you had a falling out with one of your colleagues and now you're trying less, and it's kind of a protective mechanism because you don't feel safe within your team. Did you get a new manager and you're just not vibing with that manager? Did your company pick a new direction? Did you not get chosen for promotion and now you're really disappointed? Like, what is the underlying sort of emotion and feeling that's coming towards it? And then really taking some time to self-reflect in terms of, okay, well, how can this be fixed? And sort of doing like pros and cons, or writing something down, or typing out a note, or speaking it out into a recording, something where you kind of get it out of your head. The other thing I like to tell people is, the grass isn't always greener. I think that can really be something that people get, is like, well, my company's dumb. They make me come in all the time. And we have these stupid team meetings. I got to be on Slack all day and I got to go do this. And my manager asked me for too much stuff. And it's like, okay, well, if you think that this company is going to be that different, most of that stuff's probably going to be there if you get this new job, this new opportunity, right? So what is the sort of confines you're not liking, and how do you sort of recognize that this might be like just something that is probably going to be everywhere, or just something part of the new normal in terms of working? But I really think it all, again, eventually comes down to sort of who you are and like why you're doing it. And if it's something you recognize it's something that's a work issue, so say it's something like, no, I'm just bored. Like, I used to work on so many different projects. We had new company product launching every 3 months, and now we're not launching any new products. Well, okay, well, what sort of products are we launching? Are we launching new internal, say, software systems? Okay, well, why not call the boss and say, hey, like, I used to work on so many new launches and I thrived. I did so well and I was so proud of myself in that. I'm finding that I'm not doing that as much, like making me a little bored. Are there any sort of opportunities? I know we're implementing a new CRM system for our sales team. Can I be a part of implementing that system and act on our behalf? So it's asking, but getting clear about your ask and like, this is where I think is going to help me be a little bit happier. And then obviously, again, having dialogue, asking to take on more responsibility. And maybe it's not even responsibility within your role. Maybe it's joining the health and safety committee at your job, or maybe it's, offering to be the birthday celebrator at your office, or to take on a new responsibility, or look at other roles that they might be hiring for and say, hey, I'd like to actually apply for that role. Can I move internally? So I think it's getting creative and really taking ownership of your own sort of why behind that's happening, and then making decisions accordingly.
So similar to what you talked about a few minutes ago, that there's still that relationship thing of just going to somebody and having a conversation, right? Like, I'm feeling this way, and can we do this? Or, ideating or troubleshooting. Instead of, I think what often happens at work is that we start to build up these stories, right, from either side, from anybody. It's like, oh, this person's thinking this, or that person's doing that, or, they're laughing. And so there must be, it's like all this weird attention that we're building up these monsters. And what I find is that most often it's those are not true, but that perception is your reality, essentially, until you have those conversations. And then you're like, oh, wow, like such a dummy. Like, here's what is really happening. And I think it also lends a lot of trust and credibility to the individual because of bringing up these things, right? Like, you're humanizing yourself and others, and you're unearthing things. And I don't know, it just makes the environment better when you can have these conversations in a trusting environment, or sometimes you might have to create it, right? Like, not every environment is a trustworthy environment, but it's still up to the individuals to at least try to create it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think coming with solutions, right? So saying there's a problem, coming with solutions. Here's what I've come up with. And again, it might not always be fully received, as you said, in every environment, but you're still being able and feeling proud of yourself for coming and saying, here are the solutions I can see helping me. How can we work together on this? And it also, allows you to kind of speak up, because like at the end of the day, managers also, just like all the things employees have, their own personal lives, their own sort of internal stories and things happening, managers do too, right? Someone will be like, oh, I'm so bored and I don't have enough work. And that means my manager doesn't like me and they're giving all the work to someone else. So if you go to the manager and say, I've just been found that I'm slowed down, they may not even notice it because there's 12 people they're monitoring and you always seem to be ticking along and not having issues and getting your work in on time. So they're like, oh, this is great. They're okay. And then you'll tell them, I want some more work. It's like, oh, great. Well, we really need you to take on that project. It's something I needed help with. I didn't know who to ask. This is great. So it can become that sort of two-way dialogue. I think some people get hesitant in certain environments because they're nervous that if they show that they're not happy at work, that if people are going to get fired or laid off, that they're going to be the first ones to go.
Sure.
And ultimately, at the end of the day, I understand that in work and employment is a really big part of our lives. But if that's the kind of environment that you're in, that's probably not a good environment for you anyways, right? If you can't even speak up in a constructive, non-confrontational, solution-focused sort of dialogue with your management or with the team around you, then that should be something that you should consider. That is a giant red flag. And in terms of looking at new employment, if you're already quiet quitting, maybe that's your sign that you should actually quit, right? And kind of maybe give you a little bit of that boost to start to now put your resume together and get your sort of interview practicing and get yourself more targeted towards finding that next role.
Okay. So switching gears here, if for companies, what are the things that you recommend for these entities to hire A players? Like how do you, I know it's a broad question, but like, how do you start advising companies to do that?
Yes. Well, I think cannabis in Canada has taught us what to do, what not to do, and all the case studies forever in terms of employment and employees in the cannabis space. But I really think it starts with, again, building that core team. And that comes down to, from early on, setting a real vision and mission and having that value system decided on and discussed around sort of that core team and those individuals that are on early days, and trying to really live by that. One of the things I didn't see happen often in sort of smaller companies, they weren't focused on that as much. They weren't focused on employee culture. It was just like, okay, whatever. And so each kind of team created a little bit of its own sort of culture, which was great, but also not part of the bigger picture. And you had little pockets of differences and toxicity. And so having that sort of cohesive umbrella kind of belief over top, and actually as a senior leadership and in management, living those truths and really building them out and then revisiting them as companies grow in this sort of 6 to 12 month framework. I think that's going to be a big part of it. I think A players also, there's ways you can start to do basic screening. Our resumes pulled together just because someone recommends it. The cannabis industry in early days was a lot of a friend, or I worked with this person or whatever. Like all that is great, but those people, those personalities, those connections still need to go through the regular formatting process. So did they submit a resume? How was the resume? Does it show, detail? Does it show attention detail? Does it show excitement? Are they able to kind of explain what they do? Then when it comes down to interviews, I would recommend having multiple interviews within a company. Obviously, time is important. So maybe it's not even about doing different time frames, but having them speak to different individuals. Often what I saw is hiring managers making the decisions for hiring, but some of these individuals were more junior managers that had never been formally trained how to hire someone, how to screen someone, how to do a proper behavioral based interview where you're really asking that question and getting that proof that that person can achieve it and has that sort of drive to be able to check all the boxes. So really empowering your team where maybe the hiring manager meets with them, but also maybe someone else, or they might work cross collaboratively with your if you're talking plant touching, maybe it's a cultivation role, but maybe they'll work quite closely with the quality department. So having somebody from the quality department interview and sit down with the person and understand and make sure that grower, that cultivation person is going to integrate into the framework that needs to happen and really work within the team and work well together. Then maybe having somebody from the sanitation group talk to them as well, because they're going to interact quite often. And so it kind of empowers your team to also be a little more involved in the hiring process, and then also be able to have more voices around the table when you're evaluating people. I also think, again, evaluation tools. I used to work in government. Government interviews were very standardized. Everyone was sort of asked similar questions, especially if there was a panel or they were interviewing multiple people for the same role. So I also think having a more formalized interview structure will allow anyone who's interviewing to kind of have a cross like example of the same question and how it was answered by different individuals to be able to sort of evaluate who's the one who's going to be right for the role. And then ultimately too, in cannabis, references are easy to get and they are a very, very important piece of the pie. I do always recommend people be mindful. It's in Canada and in the US as well, it's very small in network and small industry, and word gets around. So if somebody is confidentially applying or going through a process, they expect that information to be kept confidential. But once you get to those sort of final stages, asking them for their references and asking them for references within the industry so you can actually evaluate that person and hear how they did from those people. And if you have any sort of contacts who might have worked with them before, asking, okay, well, we also know this person who worked with you. Can we reach out to them? And making sure you're having that dialogue to get that sort of 360 vision of that person.
So essentially all the things that you're saying take a ton of work. Like it is just so much, and not to say that that's a bad thing, because one of the things that I've learned is that for hiring, the more work you do, I feel like the better candidates and the better team members you get. And I still don't do as much as I think I could do, right? Because there's always this balance, right? For a business owner, for the manager, whomever. I think in business nowadays, there's this weird sort of culture of just like do more, right? Like, the more that you do, the better results, and that there's no correlation there, right? But that's just the culture that we've created. And with hiring the right person on the team, it's such a high leverage activity to do. It's just like, who am I looking for? What are the characteristics or skills or traits that they need? And where can I go to find them? Like there are a myriad of things that you can do, right, to find them. And then like you're saying, what are the structured interview questions that I should ask? And if they answer this way, then they're this type of candidate. If they answer this way, well, then they're like amazing. We should hire them. Like there's so much to do. And so hopefully for anybody listening, after hearing you say all these things, they're probably thinking like, oh my God, like that's ridiculous. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to write a 2-sentence job description and I need to get A players or I'm out. Just to dissuade that notion that there is a lot to do. Obviously there's a balance, but there are genuine benefits from taking the time and really thinking like, who do I want? It's like spending the time. Like there's so much value that you can gain from truly doing that work.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And don't forget, the A-star candidates are also evaluating you during a job interview, right? As a management, as a company. So I see that now, especially once you get more of an informed cannabis or hemp candidate who's been through what I call the washing machine, might have had some false promises, might have seen a company fall apart, might have been part of layoffs. when they're coming back to have conversations with new companies, they're asking tough questions. They want to know, do you have financials? What's your budget? What's your management structure? How are you going to evaluate me? How are we going to hold true to promises? How are you, where are my metrics? What are you doing in terms of growth? What's your future vision? Where are we in 6 months? Like, they're asking these tough questions because they're also taking trust in your company and a leap of faith if they're coming into your company to work as well, right? So there is a two-way dialogue, and those really good candidates are also going to be evaluating you. So if you show that you don't really care and you're just hiring whoever and putting them in, either they're going to sniff that out during the interview process, or they're going to get a job. They're going to be on the inside. They're going to see what it's like, and then they're going to go. And if they're a key player and they're somebody who's well respected by your staff, if they walk, you know who's going to follow them? All the people that like that person is like, well, so-and-so left, that's a bad flag. Let's go. Or they, must have really not got along with so-and-so. So I think there's real opportunity to take some time in the beginning. There's some data out there. I don't have the exact numbers, but they say, a wrong hire can cost a company like $40,000 or $50,000, right? And that's where this discussion around recruitment and recruiters, recruitment services, and why you would pay us to do it. It's because, we're doing a lot of that on the back end. We're doing the checks for you. We're using our network. There's someone I saw come through for one of the teams I'm working with, and it was someone who I had a personal, negative experience previously with in the industry, and immediately said to the team, we shouldn't be representing that person because this is what happened. And so that recommendation already helped save that person from going through the process and getting hired by a client, but then calls us in a few months and says, hey, this person's not working out. There's this wrong. It can help and save. And so when you build in that expertise, especially in early days, if you're a really lean startup and you don't have an HR team, you don't have a recruitment team, having talent solutions, individuals who are helping you, like recruitment teams, in like HR teams, you can kind of call in. I call it more embedded fractional, HR and recruitment services. Having those people in place might cost you a little more money upfront, but in the long run, it's helping you move through some of this process and making sure you get the right people in place and making sure that you're not the one who's trying to do it all by yourself.
Yeah, awesome. So then moving on to a couple of other questions that I have for you. So being that you are not, you work in cannabis, you're not doing the thing, right? Like of like the cannabis production and whatnot, but you're still in the industry. And so I'm curious about your perspective of, have you thought of any opportunities that are being missed in the industry? Like, I'm not talking about just the hiring side, right? But just like you being an observer. I'm sure you're in a lot of meetings and conversations and talking to owners and just like seeing the industry from sort of a side. Do you see anything that is being missed by the companies that are active in the industry?
One of the things, I think there's, we're doing some things right. Some of the stuff we just have to figure it out as we go. So we're kind of seeing the good stuff on the other side. But one of the things I think is really interesting in this sort of ongoing roots versus suits debate, right, is the real sort of like roots, like diehard cannabis and hemp people are like, we're a new industry and everything's different. And, we're not the same as pharma. We're not the same as CPG. We're not the same as alcohol. Like, we're going to do it ourselves. It's like, whoa. There's best practices in all of those industries that we can take and integrate into cannabis. Why are we reinventing the wheel just to learn that it doesn't work or it works better a different way when some of these traditional industries have taken, hundreds of years and billions of dollars to refine a process? If you look at a manufacturing process or an agriculture process, okay, well, this is how they cultivate cucumbers the best. And they found out that if they cultivate on this day and hire this type of staff and do it in this sort of process or this sort of order, that it's the most effective. Okay, listen to that, right? And then integrate a little bit for cannabis plants and what has to happen. But why would we say, well, we're not agriculture, like don't listen to them. So I think that's something that I've seen really challenging, is this whole idea that like we are nothing like them. So just to forget it all and kind of put on blinders and go forward. It's like, why not reinvent, like take the wheels that are already working pretty well and just sort of modify them a little bit for us. So I think that's something that I really see as a gap, is like taking traditional industry and also, understanding how we can be helped by that instead of trying to push it away. the other thing, I really see, and part of that is the regulatory framework we have up here, especially in Canada, is, we're lacking education. We're lacking consumer education. Because of the restrictions that we have up here in terms of marketing and advertising and, in various areas of the world as well, the consumer information, consumers aren't learning about new products. We have all these new products coming out, this new innovation, but then it kind of gets lost in the air because the consumers actually don't even know how to use it, or the people that would be educating them on how to use these new products, how to look at integration into their current lives or wellness, or their pets' lives or their children's lives. How do we sort of integrate it on a wider scale when we don't necessarily have the ability to market it and educate in the same way we can for every other product? So that's something that the whole industry is sort of evaluating. And you obviously have products going through the medical channels and the medical framework, and there is a big push around medical education. But when we come to recreational products, and we're looking at, I was on a plane with this really lovely older couple from the US when I was traveling through New York earlier this year, and they said, "Oh, what do you do?" I said, "I have a recruiter in cannabis." And I said, "Oh," and the wife kind of taps the husband on the shoulder. She goes, "Oh, you're supposed to get that CBD stuff for your shoulder pain." He goes, "Yeah, I was supposed to go to this store called Sephora and get this Lord Jones, but it's expensive, and I was nervous. And am I going to get high?" And so it's very cool. On one hand, you could go and buy a CBD pain topical at Sephora, which is like a well-known retail company, but then he still kind of had this lack of knowing how to use it, and felt the pricing was there. So there was a little bit of education around it. So I think allowing more connection to the consumer and kind of saying, and pulling the curtain back and being like, we don't just want to talk in our lingo, who know cannabis, we know CBD, we know it's, don't forget, most of the world doesn't even know what it is. So how do we start with talking to people on a very, very simple basis and kind of help them kind of baby step into learning about the products that we're making, learning about the industry, showing how it's grown, teaching them that it's a plant at the end of the day that comes from, earth and soil or however growing medium we're growing it. But, it still is a plant. And so how do they sort of integrate that into their lives and kind of circumvent some of that stigma around it being sort of this drug, but also understand how it can really be incorporated into their day-to-day lives?
Yeah. In Canada, what are the limitations for marketing cannabis? Like, can you make medical claims or can you not? Because like here in the States, you cannot say pretty much anything other than the function, like this is going to get you high or not, like, some variations of that.
Yes, we're very, very similar. There's very strict regulations. You can't really do marketing. We're banned from platforms like Instagram and Facebook. We can't do Google ads. It's just not a possibility there. It's similar to our pharmaceutical and sort of alcohol model, where if you're advertising it, it has to be very vague and you don't know what it's for. And as you said, kind of something that is not marketed towards children. Not in anything that's not age gated in digital media. So there are a lot of restrictions. And then on top of it, here in Canada, CBD and hemp is regulated under our cannabis bill still. So if I want to buy a CBD face serum, which I do, there's some really great products up here, I have to go to a dispensary, and it comes in a childproof package, and it looks really, it's the same oil bottle as my tinctures. So it's like, I'm fine and comfortable with it, but some people wouldn't be comfortable having that in their bathroom next to their beautiful makeup jars. So how do you sort of continue to sort of work on that? And that's something in Canada we're really looking at and hoping to change the next year or so, to have the hemp and the hemp products that are taken out of the cannabis bill and put under, different regulatory framework.
Yeah, it's such an interesting conversation because here in the States, we've been waiting for the FDA to give us some guidance, right? Like, okay, well, you can say this or you can't say that. Well, sorry, you can say this or the other. But I think it's still a challenge. Like I really want to make some sort of like an Instagram reel of just, like a customer coming into the store and asking like, "Oh, hey, like, is CBD good for my pain?" And like right before the representative says something, like the FDA is in like a referee shirt, and they like blow the whistle, right? Like, "Oh, okay, sorry, I can't really answer that." Because that's a lot of times what it feels like. Customer reads all these different articles that are all over the web, right? Like in like major publications that like now have sponsored articles about like CBD is great for A, B, and C. And then so when the customer tries to interact with a company, they're like, "Sorry, like I can't really say." It's like it's an awkward part of the conversation.
Yeah, and ultimately with cannabis and hemp and all these products, all of us have our own endocannabinoid system, and we're all going to interact with it well. So, I was taking CBD for many years, so I would, send the same product to some of my friends, and I get messages, "Are you sure there's no THC in this? I'm so high." And I'm like, "How are you high?" Like it's not a product that gets you high. But their endocannabinoid system was so sensitive, they did get something high from it, whether that was, psychological. But so, how do you try it? You have to try it for yourself. How much you take, if you buy the Lord Jones topical product, how much do you put on your hand to make it effective? I don't know, you put it on, and when it's fine, right? Like there's this weird space. And, we have the same sort of issues up here in North America and in Canada with what we call bud tenders, who are the frontline retail staff, assisting people coming in. There's so many things they cannot say. And some of the companies gotten quite creative, but you have relax. Okay, well, the relax ones will put me to sleep. You can't call it sleep. Or you have a moon sign, and then you have a sun sign, and then you know that this one I take during the day and that one I take at night, right? So there is a lot of challenges with having to get, and that's also part of the fun. How do you get creative? How do you educate people? How do you act as this bridge? And I know companies then get to provide product knowledge sessions to the frontline bud tenders. So how do you get creative with helping them sort of navigate those conversations? How do you get creative with how you're sort of creating a story and a narrative with pictures or with colors? And it's not exactly foolproof, and we have a lot of work to do, but I think companies have that opportunity to really say, okay, and then look at who else is doing it and how they're doing it, and sort of understand how they can integrate that into their own sort of marketing and branding models.
All right, perfect. So just to start wrapping up here, I have a page full of notes from what you talked about. I think it's really helpful. And also I think a lot of really practical things, just things that for myself, like I'll take back to the office and just consider, and how to continue working on better culture and better hiring practices and those kinds of things. Because there's no endpoint, right, for all these things, like for hiring and for having relationships. Like you never get to the point where you say, like, I've maximized my relationship abilities, or like, my company's the best. Like, so it just, there's always something that you can learn from, and just adapt your style of whatever your focus is. So as we're wrapping up, one of the things that I appreciate about you is that you're very succinct, and your ideas are very clear. So you seem to have like a diverse sort of background, or maybe just a learning style. Like, who do you learn from, either about the industry or about hiring specifically, or just maybe just even about life? Like, where do you get your knowledge and your inspiration from?
Yeah, well, thank you very much for that. And I've been really lucky. I had a very diverse background in terms of my schooling. I graduated in public health and got into government work. I was able to work at all levels in government and healthcare resource management. So got to really understand sort of that scope, get closer to the patient. I did some research work in the not-for-profit world. And then I got to travel around the world and work in different diversity and amongst different individuals and in different startup worlds and stuff like that. So I've just been really lucky and been able to kind of take all of that and kind of incorporate it into the general themes that I see. I follow LinkedIn. LinkedIn's a great platform with people in cannabis and hemp. It is the place where our community gathers and networks and is able to be quite well received. So there's a lot of individuals on that I follow along to get their scope, especially, for me, learning the US market. Each state's its own market, right? So following some key individuals who will post information. There's some really great newsletters you can sign up for free. So starting to understand what's happening each week in the industry and kind of keep one eye on it. In terms of recruitment, in terms of learning HR strategies, again, LinkedIn is a great resource for that. I found people whose voices I really listened to, who I really aligned with, and following them and kind of understanding how they're talking about work and whether that be within cannabis or not, and sort of integrating that down. I listen to a lot of podcasts. I've been a Tim Ferriss podcast listener for years, and listened to a lot of individuals who have very deep conversations about a wide range of topics. I think it's always fascinating to keep that diversity amongst your mind. I like to read, so that's all the books out there. And then I also have been really fortunate in my life and in the community. I know Toronto I live in is a very cultural, very rich and diverse city. It's, Canada's biggest city. So, we get to have conversations all over the world. And so my friendship groups, my community groups are very rich and diverse. And I've always liked to have different perspectives and different insight and different people doing different things. So all of that kind of allows me to boil it down. And then I've also been really privileged myself. People have followed along on LinkedIn and are doing it more and more. And I'm able to have these conversations. I'm starting to do LinkedIn Lives, but I did one last week. I failed hard. So I got to do my first one this week, and hopefully the integration for the live stream works. But, it's having these conversations and just practicing and doing it again, and starting to really speak from truth. And ultimately, as I said earlier, like, it always comes down to the human inside and the person, the people first. And that's really something that I live, I breathe, that I am as a person. So when it comes from an authentic place, I feel like it's quite easy to speak out. And those people that it resonates with, they feel that, and they can kind of like follow along.
Awesome. Well, I think that's a good place to wrap up. So if somebody is either an employer looking for your help on hiring A players, or if somebody is looking to work in the cannabis industry, how do they get a hold of you?
Yeah, so LinkedIn is going to be your best bet. If I'm putting all of my love into one social channel. So following along on LinkedIn, I do a weekly Tip Tuesday video where I give a quick tip for job applicants. And then I'm also starting to do LinkedIn Live, where I'll be doing live Q&A every week. And you can connect with me there, and then I can message you and we can set up conversations. I love talking to people. I love talking to companies and clients to learn about their pain points, see who I know. I have a very diverse network, individuals who are looking to get into cannabis, helping them around in any way I can really support. I always love a good conversation. I also have a website as well, with pow.com. Right now, it's just pretty simple, but that will be integrating more and having more resources on there, free resources as well as paid resources, and helping people again to integrate into the cannabis space and really learn where they can find their place and build their career in the industry.
Awesome. And then on LinkedIn, your name is under Stephanie Pow. And sometimes there are a lot of variations on there. So anybody can reach out, connect with you, and then you can give them some top quality consultation and some advice. Stephanie, thank you so much. I really appreciate our conversation today, and just how you just came out and gave us all you had. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Jason. And I hope you enjoy the sun wherever you are. And yes, look forward to future conversations.
Absolutely.
Hey guys, and before you go, this is Jason from Spectrum Labs. Please be sure to visit us on the web at thespectrumlabs.com for any show notes and links discussed in the podcast. Also, remember to click the subscribe button wherever you may be listening from so you get notified when our next episode comes out. And tune in next show and have a fantastic day.